Folks, here I am on Friday morning for you, yet Tuesday afternoon for me. I am here with no mug, which tells you the rush I'm in, but I am here for History Matters, and boy, this coffee, more than I can say. I'm here to have a brief conversation about something that I was asked about Sunday, actually, and a few of you might have seen it. It was a conversation on MSNBC, and they told me in advance that they were going to ask me this, and I gave me pause because I didn't necessarily know that I wanted to talk about this on TV. But it's worth talking about here with you in our wonderful History Matters community. So the question that I was told in advance, right? So they didn't spring this on me. They said, well, you know, and this was the Velshi show, Sunday morning, MSNBC. They said, well, you know, we remember in the hearing, this last week's hearing, that the former oath keeper, I think, who left them, said something about had things gone differently on January 6th, it might have been the spark that started a civil war. And what they wanted me to talk about was that, right? They wanted me basically to talk about, so what do you think about that, Professor Freeman? Do you think that that might have started a civil war? Now, I've actually been asked that question, or it has been proposed to me that we are in a civil war for years now. During Trump's presidency, I remember, I guess it was the BBC interviewed me for a radio program. And the question that they asked me was, so is this really basically a civil war without the guns? Now, first of all, without the guns, we won't even go there. But, you know, already years ago, they were asking if, well, you guys, you already are in a civil war. It's just you guys haven't really started battling yet. And I said at the time, yeah, no. And we weren't there at the time. And I don't think we're there now. But what I want to talk to you about is, what do we mean when we say civil war? Because I think that's a misleading and in a way comforting, oddly enough, stay with me here, folks, I'll get you there, comforting way to think about what's going on right now. Because the fact of the matter is, if you were to ask me, are we about to have a civil war? And if your question assumes, well, it's going to be, you know, side X versus side Y, and there'll be battles, and it'll be very clearly a war, and it'll be easy to tell who's fighting for who. I mean, the idea of civil war, the concept of civil war, I think in our minds, even without thinking about it, draws up ideas about clearly defined sides, and wars have beginnings and endings, and battles and such. I think civil war means something very specific. So, for example, Alexander Hamilton, at least once, in the 1790s, referred to the revolution as the Civil War, which makes perfect sense, right? There actually was a war with a beginning and an end and battles, and it was initially British subjects fighting British subjects in one way or another. So by that definition, he was pretty much on target. It was a civil war. But that brings us back to the present. Where are we now and what does that mean? Now, part of what I said when asked this question was exactly what I'm starting to tell you now, which is, the phrase civil war is problematic because it kind of gets us off the hook. Oh no, we're not going to have a civil war. What kind of a question is that? You know, civil war, and civil wars float up here and they're very big, and you know, no, we're not going to go there. I don't think that's the question to ask. You know, I said maybe the question to ask is, are we going to have civil violence? Not a war, not something defined, not something with, you know, individual battles, something a lot more amorphous. And in a sense, you could say we're already seeing a little bit of that, right? We're already seeing threats of violence, like really serious threats of violence against, for example, office holders. And you could, I'm sure you are sitting there, and if there were a chat, you would be putting in chat all of the things that you could think of that involve people threatening, either with guns or just with threats, other people at this particular moment. And certainly we have a sense right now that there are two basic sides, and each side stands for something. I'm not going to delve into what they stand for, but so if I were to be asked, might there be, civil violence, which seems like I can't remember what the phrase for that is, like jumbo shrimp. Civil violence is another one of those. If there's going to be violence between Americans, I would say, well, possibly, because there kind of already is, and the table is being set for more. And I don't think it would shock anyone if I said, yeah, I think there might be some violence, but I'm not talking about a battle, and I'm not talking about a national campaign, and I'm not talking about something with a clear beginning and a clear ending. What I'm talking about is we are in a moment when people are fueled by, and I'm actually going to be talking about this at the conference I leave for tomorrow. People are really fueled by, or trying to get their constituents fueled by, emotion. So on the part of the right, and we've talked about this a zillion times here on History Matters, that part of what people are doing in politics, and why it's why you need to pause and think about the words people are using and how they're confronting you and whether they're trying to make you respond emotionally. We see lots of politicking of one kind or another. And right now, particularly on the right, which is in a sense using outrage and anger as a kind of ideology. They're not necessarily saying we stand for this policy. I mean, think about, I think it was 2016, when they didn't have a platform for the presidential election. They just said, our platform is be loyal to Donald Trump. That's not a policy-driven group of people. That's a group of people that are, I think largely right now driven by emotion and everything that represents, but that's a lot of what's going on there. On the other side, on the left, I think there's kind of an assumption, maybe on the part of some on the left, that Americans are going to be so emotional and so upset about what's happening on the right that we naturally will rise up and protest and do what we have to do kind of on our own, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of organization, certainly from up high. And I've said before that most successful political efforts are ground level up. But at any rate, I think the left is kind of counting on Americans to rise up and be outraged and stop things. And I think on the right, they're outraging people to cause things to happen. I think that's where we are. And I think that's where our politics is. And I think each side, in some way, some more than others, now is at a place where they think the other side, I don't want to say is an other, because I think on the right, that there's rhetoric that some are using about people on the left being, I don't know, vermin, bugs, insects, they must all be killed. That's not so much the rhetoric that's appearing from the left, which is not to say that the left is scot-free on everything, but it's the right that's traveling in that very bloody othering kind of a vein, way more than the left is. That othering vein, and many other people besides me have said this in any number of venues, that's what becomes dangerous, is when you dehumanize the people who you are opposed to, so that you're no longer fighting people or fellow Americans, you're just fighting evil, fill in the blank, and acting on that anger is virtue, right? That's some of the dynamic of emotion that we're seeing right now. And on the left, right? The left, I think, are feeling more and more backed against the wall, more and more that things are becoming dire. They are already dire. I don't know what will happen for folks on the left. The right pretty much has their pattern mapped out. All of this is a long way of saying, no, I don't think there will be civil war, but I think we need to think really hard right now about who we are. And I think, again, some people on the right have a very clear line about what is we and what is them. Some on the left do too, but there are many people who don't. And I think, and it's easy for me to say, and the first thing that pops into my head is someone saying, yeah, well, but we're talking about who's the we, and meanwhile, I'm somehow suggesting we need to make friendly with, for example, white supremacists. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we need to think about who we want to be and where we want to be as a nation. We need to think about who we are. I was just literally writing this before recording this. I was trying to figure out the one of the last few paragraphs of my presidential address, which has been giving me great angst. And one of the things that I was saying was, so where can we go from here? I don't have the answer. I'm a historian. I don't, look off into the future. I'm not a seer. But, what could we do? Well, we could certainly think about really, really who we are right now, not who we wish we were, not who we want to be but aren't, but really grapple with this moment in a serious way, really look at our history in a serious, healthy way, and grapple with who we are and who we want to be. It's not going to solve problems, but it would be a nice start if we weren't using history as a shorthand and a variety of the other things that people are doing right now to get around the fact that we aren't necessarily thinking about who we are as a people. I also think it's interesting to wonder if this next generation of people that comes along, if they are going to have a different set of shoulds and should nots, if they're going to find an easier time letting go of some of the things that we're clinging to, we older folk. It must be, maybe this new generation will have a healthier way of approaching things, or maybe they'll be willing to let some things go that we're still hanging on by our fingernails. Maybe we need new people with a new language and new assumptions to pull us out of this pit that we're in. I say that while at the same time acknowledging I don't want to say, let's just leave it to the next generation, right? Oh, well, we goofed this up. I don't think that's a responsible solution. I think it's worth thinking about. Maybe part of what we should be doing in grappling with who we are is really thinking about who we are and who we might be and what we might need to be doing right now to be healthier as a nation. I don't have the answer to that, but I do think, and I've said this also a million times, we have to let go of the idea that somehow or other the United States is exceptional. We will never end up in a really bad place. Everything is somehow or other will all be fine in the end. And we have to give up the idea, and it's an idea that's really appealing. And I'm sure in one way or another, you've heard it in rhetoric. It's an idea that in the long span of the arc of history, things will swing back to being right. I don't think we should wait around for the arc of history. I don't know if there is an arc of history. What I do know is that individuals can make a difference. And I think if you vanish underneath the big frame of civil war, or if you back away and say, well, everyone hates everyone, and so I guess this is where we are, or if you use shorthands. Another thing that I was writing about was how handy the founders are as a kind of shorthand, so that people don't have to grapple with who we've been and who we want to be, right? That some on the right can point to the founders and say, virtuous, wonderful people, this is what we want to be, which means nothing, right? It means nothing, because these are people hundreds of years ago. That's an empty statement that's using the founders as a kind of blanket over deep thought. And on the left, people are doing a variety of things. One of the things they're doing is saying, well, to heck with all those guys, because they were corrupt and they founded something that was fatally flawed. I think that's an easy way out too. I think we need to actually wrestle with what we were, what we have been, and where we want to go. And I think using the founders as a sort of anchor for who we are as a nation, I think at this point in time, that's a little bit lazy. And I'm saying that as someone who works on the founders, spent my whole career as a historian, pretty much, except for the recent past, focus on the founders. Anyway, this is a long roundabout way of saying we need to think about the words we're using. We need to think about what we're thinking about, right? We need to not get stuck in this moment and really think about who are we as a nation? Who do we want to be? And what might that look like? And it's easy to say that, and we might all sit around and sort of ponder off to ourselves, yes, I want to be this kind of nation. I just think a lot of people are not thinking on that level right now. And I think they're trusting to the arc of history, or I think they're trusting to exceptionalism. And I think I've used this phrase before too. We're at a moment of extreme contingency. Someone just got bingo. We're at a moment of extreme contingency. And we are. And that means that things might be really bad, but it also means that things might become good, and perhaps in ways we don't know, if we step forward and find ways to make efforts to push things in a good and not a bad direction. I don't have the answer to that. I wish I could. And it's frustrating as heck when I do any kind of public venue and someone says, well, what do we do? And I don't have the easy solution. I can only say as a historian that clinging to the past in a vague kind of a way, tossing around big phrases, big words, big concepts without anchoring them in any kind of reality, assuming everything's going to be just fine and dandy because it always has been before, which it actually always has not been before. None of those things are useful, and none of those things are going to help us particularly right now. And I think we need to think big. I think we need to, for example, just that question. If you, it would be interesting to hear what people have to say. Do you think we're going to have a civil war? And I bet a bunch of people would say, yeah, it's coming. But if you sat down with people and said, well, what do you mean by that? What does that look like? Right? You can't draw a line across the country. You're not going to have North versus South. What does that look like? How does that work? I don't think it does. And I just think it's more complicated than that. And I think more complicated can be a plus. So that's my long roundabout way of talking about that question that I was asked. What do you think about the fact that we're going to have a civil war? I don't think that's a good question. And I also think we need to be careful about the words we use. Civil war, I think, is not useful. It just covers more things than it reveals. Same thing about, what do we call the events of January 6th? Was that a riot? Was that a coup? I was calling it a coup at a very early point, and a lot of people weren't. And I felt very nervous about that because I thought, looks to me like a failed coup. I don't know what else you call it, trying to seize the government, turn over an election, but hey, maybe you have another understanding of it. We're seeing that a lot in the hearings too, that now they're just using the word coup unapologetically. And I think that's important because I think that's precisely what it was. And I think, I unfortunately cannot live tweet this Thursday's hearing because I will be at the presidential plenary session at my conference. So I can't, I'll try and catch up. I'll go back to Twitter and see what people have been saying about it. But we're going to, in one way or another, we're going to get more insight on all of the ways in which Trump and his administration did nothing to get in the way of what was going on, rather facilitating it and only intervening after hours and hours under protest, right? So we're going to, it's not going to alter my sense that what happened that day was an attempted coup. It failed. And the fact that people allowed what was happening to happen, even in some ways, set things up so that it would happen that way and then did nothing. The president of the United States sees this happening. I mean, think about it. Take a couple giant steps back, right? In another time, in another place, in another galaxy, there's a nation's Capitol building and it's being attacked and assaulted by a swarm of people, and they're breaking windows and they're breaking into the building. The leader of that nation, you would think, would that be a good moment to step in and act? Speak to Americans, speak to the rioters, get in the kinds of forces that can rein people back. All of the really obvious things that can be done, that's just the logical thing. That doesn't require any great deep thinking, right? That's just a logical thing when you're a nation and you are responsible about your citizenry and you want to protect your government. That's what you do. So anyway, Thursday we are going to get, I'm assuming, much more evidence and insight into our understanding of the ways in which things were really set up on January 6th to turn out a very different way. And that there were enough individuals and there was enough resistance that didn't happen. But even that, some people still won't call it a coup. Some people are calling it a riot. I don't know what some people are calling it, the mob. I don't even know the words that people are using. I think that matters too. I think attempted coup suggests motive, pretty bluntly, motive. And I think riot doesn't. Riot is just people upset rioting. Attempted coup means a seizure of power. That's what we saw attempted then. So anyway, back to the Civil War question. Think before you use these kinds of phrases. Encourage others to do the same thing too. Encourage your students. And I've talked about democracy before with my students in my big lecture course. I tell my students that when they write papers for me, they're not allowed to speak democracy. They're not allowed to say democracy, freedom, liberty, and sort of toss these words around and somehow assume it all adds up to America. That's lazy and it's meaningless. If you're going to toss around big words, you need to know what they mean. You need to be able to anchor them down. And that's true for a lot of the words that we're seeing tossed around today. So I encourage you, and I encourage you in your classrooms and with your family and friends, to remind them that we're in a great period of, and by great, I don't mean wonderful, but I mean big, period of unknowns, where everyone is kind of trying to feel their way through this. And that's the precise moment when you have to be the most careful as you can possibly be about your responses to things, about your assumptions about things, about how you're evaluating things, about the language that we're using. All of that, as exhausting as it seems to think about all that, is really, really important. And you can see the degree to which that's important by looking at the ways in which extreme language gets people riled up in a very short amount of time, riled up enough to want to take action. So I am just about, look at that. I didn't think I was going to last a half hour, and I did. Anyway, so that's my conversation for the day, is partly at least thinking ahead to the next hearing coming up on Thursday, partly thinking back to what I was asked on Sunday, because that was quite bracing. You know, we're going to ask you about Civil War. But really, more than anything else, as a way of linking all of those things together and reminding you in watching the hearing, and you should all watch the hearing, watching the hearing and think about all of the things that I just said. What are people saying? What is their real motive appear to have been? What are the words they're choosing? What are the excuses they're giving? What's the evidence? The hearings have been remarkable for the primary evidence that they're putting forward in case after case after case. So that's one of the things these hearings are doing quite wonderfully, is just asking us to think again about the narrative with evidence that's helping us, or aimed at helping us actually rethink. I encourage you to do the same and to be smart consumers of politics right now. And I will be back again a week from this coming, well, a week from today, which is when you're going to be watching this, although it's Tuesday. I'm pretending like it's Friday. I will be back in a week with yet another topic, and I don't know what it'll be. And maybe it'll grow out of the hearing, since I won't be able to talk about that with you, since I'll be in New Orleans. Either way, I wish you all a wonderful week. As ever, I thank you for being here on a Friday morning and engaging in democracy, having the kinds of conversations, thinking about the sorts of important ideas and cautions that we need to think about at a moment when democracy is threatened and needs to be discussed and defended. Thank you for all of that. I guess I might even say, even though I'm not going to be there, I might even say, if there is going to be an after party, which there very well might be, for those of you who are beaming in from Facebook, we are going to have, or might have, an after party, which means we do not record what happens, so that we can have a bit of a freer conversation and talk about whatever we want to talk about. If you're on Facebook and you want to join the after party, you are going to need to leave Facebook and enter the after party through the National Council for History Education website. And the link is ncheteach.org/conversations. Those of you who are already here, just stay right where you are, and poof, you will be in the after party. More bingo happening, even though I'm not there. Anyway, have a wonderful week, everyone. Wish me a lot of luck, because I'm a little bit terrified. And I will see you in a week. Bye, folks.